This week, I spoke to René Morkos from Alice Technologies and Shane Richardson from Lagrange about how to reduce risk and plan, bid, and build more efficiently through the use of technology. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to Rene and Shane on the podcast, where they helped me deliver some key insights around the importance of planning and scheduling phase before project, and the common mistake that businesses make of bringing technology in a little bit too late. Now, my main takeaway from the episode centers around how investors' mindset is changing and their view of value in the construction technology space. As René said, in 2017, we entered the construction renaissance, and soon construction will be where manufacturing was in the 1970s. Shane shared with us some data from a McKinsey report citing the construction sector is one of the largest in the world economy, with about $10 trillion spent on construction-related goods and services every year. However, the industry's productivity has trailed that of other sectors for decades, and there's a $1.6 trillion opportunity to close the gap. So tune in to learn more about why the construction technology sector is a sector to watch out for. And thanks for listening.
This is the Propcast, and I'm Louisa Dickins. Before we introduce our guest, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Are you looking for a space for women who make lasers and robots that break glass ceilings? I'm Antonia Soler, co-founder of Women in Construction Tech. If you're a founder, investor, or adopter who believes in advancing women in our industry, please join us at womeninconstructiontech.com.
Hello to all our wonderful listeners. Today on the podcast, we are going to be talking about how to reduce risk and plan, bid, and build more efficiently through the use of technology. And I am lucky enough to be joined today by René Morkos, who's CEO and founder of Alice Technologies, and Shane Richardson, who's president of Lagrange. So welcome to the show, René and Shane.
Great to be here, Lulu.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining me. So today we are going to hear how AI technology can help construction planning and scheduling abilities to keep crews flowing on any size project so we can build faster and cheaper. And as we all know, that is well needed. And I think construction industry is something like a $7 billion industry. René, you'll probably correct me on that, but it's pretty vast. But that's a stat that I read sort of earlier today. Despite the sheer opportunity of AI in construction, there's still hesitancy and adoption, but we all know most things great in life don't come easy. So our guest will be sharing with us how we can successfully integrate technology into some of the largest GCs globally, like Skanks, Earthboys, and many, many more. And basically how they came across these challenges. It's great to have both perspectives on this podcast today. I read also, I think it was earlier this week, Built Wells shared a bit of data about investment into the built environment. In 2022, it concluded with 9.6 billion in venture capital funding, which is flooding in, which is, I think it's about 338 deals, which is great to see, which is a 50% increase in early stage fundraising. Now, Alice Technologies last year, I think you announced it in June, René, it was one of the businesses that received a significant amount of funding. So René's going to be sharing us a little bit more about, I guess, this raise, the plans of it too. And then both our guests are going to share with us, how can construction also help in offering more almost like a solution to the climate crisis? So enough about me. Hopefully the audience liked that introduction and can get a bit more familiar with our guest backgrounds. Let's start with actually the questions. So René, why don't you talk us through your journey to be obviously founding Alice Technologies? I think your family has been in the construction industry. I've looked at some of the projects you worked on, which are pretty vast and they're global. Share with our audience who don't know, who haven't sort of read about you, and then obviously tell us more about Alice Technologies.
Yeah, so thanks for the intro. You're right. So my dad was in construction, and he gave me a good piece of advice when I graduated high school. And he said, "Son, study anything you want, just don't do civil engineering." And I thought to myself, I was a little bit lost, but now I know exactly what I want to do. So I studied civil engineering. I ended up in Afghanistan. I was basically a master builder. So I was tasked with like designing, building, and procuring my own jobs from A to Z, which is really cool. But I quickly kind of saw that there was a lot of inefficiency, but I think mainly it was like I was surprised how complicated it would get. It was repairing RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade attack on the runway and at the Kabul airport. A crazy location, but it was a slab. right? Even that slab, like thinking about sequencing it and how many people I would put on which, whether I was going to move more folks to rebar or formwork and so on, was a relatively complex problem. And so I kind of set out to go figure out how the pros do it. Ended up in the US, did a PhD at Stanford, kind of kept thinking I was going to find this tool that could do what I had in mind. And as I was doing my research, kind of one thing led to another, and I ended up building it. So we built the first generative construction simulator, and that's what Alice is.
And there's two parts of the product, aren't there? Is it Alice Pro Construction and Alice Manage? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
What are the differences? Because the audience, like, obviously, I know you're growing across Europe, which we'll go into a bit sort of later. But for our global listenership, can you delve in a little bit about the two different products?
Yeah, for sure. So Alice pre-construction is the ability to set up a project in the system before you go build. And so when I say set it up, for the first time ever, you can take a construction project, put it in our system, set up the rules that govern the project, which sounds abstract, but it's relatively straightforward. Like, what tasks do you need to build a column? What tasks do you need to build a slab? What resources do you need to perform those tasks, and what resources are available? That's the kind of information you give the system, and then the system generates 6 million different ways of building the project for you. You can build it with 1 crane, 2 cranes, overtime to overtime, fast drying concrete, regular concrete, and all the different permutations. You can do that in pre-construction. And so you explore all these different, you simulate for the first time ever, you simulate the construction project millions of different ways, and then you select the fastest or the cheapest or the one that's more suitable to you. Once you've selected that, you then need to go build it. And so during construction, you start uploading or updating your progress. So you start saying, this is not complete, this is delayed, this is not delayed. And you go through that and you sort of run lots and lots of simulations through the algorithm. And what the software can easily do is tell you, like, if there's a delay, this is the most effective or most efficient way to get out of that delay. Somebody might think, oh, we should try overtime. But what the software might say is, well, actually, if you work extra shifts for steel workers in October, instead of having everybody work Saturdays, that's the way to do it, right? And so that's what you can do with the system.
Now, Shane, you have obviously been in project controls for some time, and you've worked in all sorts of different asset classes and worked with huge developers, contractors. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about you, but also how you came across Alice Technologies? Where did this blossoming friendship come from? Where did you meet and everything like that?
Yeah. I started my career out with Bechtel. I actually grew up watching large mega projects get built all over the globe. My dad is he's 92. He actually grew up in London, and he worked for Bechtel for over almost 50 years. And we traveled the globe, from mining projects to big power projects to large civil infrastructure projects. Lived in Australia, the Philippines, Canada, US, and so naturally I was kind of persuaded to kind of be in that field. And my dad started in the trades, and he kind of worked his way up. It's kind of a you don't see that often. Usually you kind of go to school and all that stuff. And so he was an electrician by trade, and got my degree as an electrical engineer. And I started working for Bechtel. I was a engineer, field engineer, superintendent on various different projects. 53 million gallons of radioactive waste that we were cleaning up in Washington, over $20 billion project. And then also multi-billion-dollar new build nuclear power plant in the U.S. And that was actually one of the first ones that they were doing a new build for a while, since they had to kind of stop building nuclear plants for a bit. Lots of different kind of applications of project controls in different industries. And one of the things that I took home from my dad, he was a big proponent for data, and he would always write everything down. But he just tracked data, like productivity is super old school. And I noticed, that was one of the things that wasn't being leveraged, everywhere I went was, how can we use this data to make better informed decisions? And I think there's a ton of data out there, like just massive amount of schedule data, cost data, and it's really cumbersome for people out in the field to go use and try to make, I'm going to make a decision based off of this. I mean, it's not fully leveraged across the industry. So I think that's one of the reasons why the construction industry has been so lacking in productivity gains. So I met Rene. I was actually working at Katera, a startup, trying to prefab everything in factories, ship it off the site, erect everything like Legos, address the issue of inability of having resources. So if you can take everything in a controlled environment, you're reducing the hours needed to actually construct out in the field. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of leverage. I mean, we were implementing new tools, new scheduling tools, and actually one of the senior managers at that company referred me to Alice, and I got a demo. It wasn't Rene; it was actually a sales guy, Dan Evans, great guy.
Good work,
at
Dan.
First, yeah. At first, I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't Rene doing the demo. I was like, oh, it's just another sales guy trying to sell me on a tool, doesn't know project controls. But he gave me access to kind of surf around and play around with it. And I was like, oh, wow, this is actually something that can really, really change the way we plan projects. And as Rene mentioned, I mean, the planning phase of a project is, to me, like everything. Like if you don't set up the plan properly, then it's not going to execute, efficiently. And so that's such a key integral, component of a project. And so that's what Alice does, is basically give you that optimized plan.
And you mentioned about, well, in my introduction, I mentioned about some of the hesitancies in the construction industry. And you mentioned you worked for Katera before, which I think was previously, obviously it's no longer around, but wasn't it valued as like 4 billion? Didn't quite go to plan. I don't think developers could see the value. So I think there's been a few, I mean, that was everywhere. And I think that's created a lot of uncertainty around certain products, especially when some of the first ones haven't, it creates a bit of worry and more uncertainty. Were there any other things which I guess you and your business thinking like, do we really need an AI solution? Like, what were the sort of thoughts behind it?
Well, I think with specifically, some projects and programs, they decide to bring in a new solution because things aren't going well, and they think it's going to pull them out of a sinking ship. And I think that's kind of, one of the challenges a lot that I find is usually we're brought in when things aren't going well, where ideally you're brought in the beginning phase and you get the plan in place before you even start executing. So I think that's part of the challenge is, a lot of times you're already like, 20+% complete with the project, and you've already kind of, there's a certain point where you can always minimize risk, minimize costs on a project, but as you progress on a project, the further you progress, I mean, you lose out on that opportunity. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges with implementing kind of new technologies is, being brought in way late in the game. And I worked on the claims side as well, where things hit the fan and contractors are suing each other and there's delays, people pointing fingers, and then like you're never going to recoup that cost. So that's why it's better to come in early and set up that plan before the project executes, and then just maintain it.
And I guess, Rennie, from your side, you obviously have, Alice is global now. You've implemented technology in lots and lots of different customers of yours. And what are the challenges you've seen? I guess there's always two sides of it. There's your customer who might sort of, I guess, blame the technology. The technology might sort of blame the customer, maybe not having the right sort of solution engineers or the right sort of systems in place, or even conviction from the business. Say, hey guys, you actually have to use it properly and listen to what technology guys are saying if you want to get any sort of value out of it. But what have you sort of seen?
I guess like in terms of like implementation, the truth is like construction doesn't have a reputation of being a innovative field, but in any industry, you're going to find innovators like Shane or like the folks at Canadian Nuclear Labs, and they're really willing to push the edge and the boundary. We worked with a planner at Skanska called Claire, and she was really pushing the envelope on what the software could do. So I just think that, if you find the right people, you quickly overcome these sort of barriers of implementation and integration. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, I guess having champions in every sort of industry, and I guess from businesses like Skanska, who there's so many different departments of it, and getting it, I guess, integrated fully globally must be, I guess it takes time, but if you have to push people referring it, like in any sort of industry, it helps across there, I'm sure. When you first started out, obviously both of you have, you've been in the construction and built environment space for a significant amount of time. For people sort of entering it, what are the sort of major trends and changes you've seen? Because when was that? When was Alice Technology sort of started out, René?
Yeah, 2015 we started working on it full time. So January 2015 we started working full time.
What are the major changes you've seen in the construction industry? And Shane, obviously, I'd love to get your perspective as well in terms of, people saying, right, let's actually use this. This solutions are needed. We can't keep working, building the same way we used to.
I think that when we started raising money for Alice in 2015, I mean, investors' eyes would just roll over, and they're like, construction tech, like, oh hell no, I wouldn't get involved in that, no way. And then I think 2017, right, was the construction renaissance, right, which is what I call it. But yeah, what's happening in construction today is what happened to manufacturing in the 70s and 80s, right? It's really becoming digitized. It's becoming integrated, across the supply chain. We're really sort of unlocking that are standard in other fields. And so I think this is the most exciting time to be in construction tech in the last, I don't know, maybe arguably 2 millennia, but like we're finally sort of, I think what we're going to see in the next 20 years in our lifetime is construction is going to catch up to manufacturing and maybe finance and other fields in terms of the sophisticated solutions in our field. Maybe that's a good, setup for Shane to kind of add some points to.
I work with a lot of different customers all over the globe, a lot of US companies. Everywhere you go, there's a huge investment in digital transformation. I mean, everyone's trying to implement the newest tool. There's so many out there. I call them project management information systems, PMIS, I think is one of the big things. Just basically digitizing all the data that's available, with a construction company to try to increase productivity. And I think, there's a huge need for it. It's also difficult too, because a lot of these solutions are brought as kind of like it's gonna be a fix for everything, right? We're gonna just bring in this new tool and it's gonna fix everything. But I think a lot of the challenges, I mean, I think it's like any industry really. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to bring in this new ERP system and it's going to fix all this and that. And I think that's what I'm finding is that they're kind of basically taking their current processes and then just pushing it into the new tool. It's kind of like just taking data that's kind of scattered and then just putting it in the same or in a different tool. And I think that's kind of the challenge that I'm going through a lot is, finding, okay, yeah, we got to digitize all the data, but we got to look at, the core tools, the core processes, and make sure that those are appropriate and those need to be changed. That way, we're not building tool around, and that's why I like Alice. Is basically kind of forces you to think differently when it comes to planning and scheduling, and it's such a difficult task to create to traditionally build a schedule. I mean, you need all different stakeholders and you're together in a room and you're just kind of manually doing things and you rely on a pretty much a single point kind of failure person to really kind of make sure that information is getting translated properly in the schedule. Like, okay, a superintendent said, all right, I need this many people, this much equipment, and then you have to take consideration, productivity, and then you got literally one person trying to translate that information from all different people.
It's
Whereas
worrying. It worries me.
it's way too much. It's data overloaded. And just to kind of give you for those that aren't schedulers or planners, the CNL schedule. I mean, when we had almost a couple 100,000 pieces of metadata to kind of to indicate how many hours of each resource is needed for each task, because you'll have different resources with varying number of hours, and those hours those are built off of unit rates. Like I've got 10 linear feet of pipe and I get a half a hour per linear feet. I mean, they're all based off of all of these different, and we're talking a couple 100,000 bits of metadata that we have to manage on a day-to-day basis. And we've got like 8 people that are managing that schedule. And so it's just not, I mean, it's not possible to really ensure that schedule is 100% accurate. It's just not. And I think that's one of the reasons why construction projects we're plagued with delays, for decades and decades. And it's because how do we fix that problem of being able to translate accurate data into the schedule and maintain it? And so that Alice takes care of that. So now you just have the direct feed from the subject matter expert, from the superintendent, from the engineer, right into Alice, and Alice will crunch all that for you. And I think that's huge. That's huge for the industry. And I think folks are, obviously it's growing and getting more, Alice is getting more customers and clients, and they're seeing that. So I think there'll be eventually I feel like it's going to be the new way we schedule for, across the industry.
Yeah, so those listening in who are in the GC world, developer construction world, definitely check out, especially if you've got issues with planning and scheduling. But both of you are backgrounds, like I said, obviously civil engineering, program management, everything like that. What's for all whether it's integration, and obviously I run a technology recruitment firm that's obviously focuses within the built environment. I'm permanently looking at how we can attract people into construction technology industry. And you sort of mentioned about how it's going to be the next manufacturing finance, like we're going to catch up with it's needed. There's so many skill gaps in the podcast after this. I'm actually have the program manager for the City of London. We're obviously going through a huge renovation of our city and all the skills that are needed, and they just aren't here. I know we're going through a few choppy times now. Lots of people can be looking for jobs, but the skills sadly just aren't quite there. So a lot of upskilling needs to happen. What have you sort of seen in terms of, so you said why you're both in it, but for the skill gap, where do you think that sort of sits for? And Rene, you can maybe answer what you've seen as you've sort of been growing your business. And then I guess, Shane, I'd love to hear from you as well.
I'm a professor at Stanford, an adjunct professor at Stanford. And so I have a